When a mother checked her home security cameras, she uncovered a horrifying secret. She was forced to make a difficult choice to protect her daughter. It could change their lives forever. The call came just as Laura was stepping out of a meeting, an unexpected interruption that pricked her nerves before she even answered. She glanced at the caller ID, Sophia's school. Her chest tightened as she picked up. "Ms. Laura," the voice was firm but patient, belonging to Mrs. Morales, Sophia's homeroom teacher. "I wanted to discuss Sophia with you. She's been different recently." Laura's voice held steady, but a pang of concern settled in. "Is she all right?" There was a pause. "Well, she's been acting out. Avoiding class, irritable, and easily frustrated with her classmates when they try to engage her. It's a change from her usual self." Laura felt the words gnaw at her. Sophia was a reserved but cheerful girl, always thoughtful and soft-spoken. These days it seemed as if something behind those big, bright eyes was hiding in the shadows. Laura thanked Mrs. Morales and hung up, making a silent note to ask Sophia directly when she got home. She braced herself, scanning over the busy afternoon sprawled across her planner, but her mind couldn't shake what she'd just heard. It clung to her, casting a shadow that grew darker with each passing minute. That evening, Laura waited in the kitchen, her hands occupied with the rhythm of chopping vegetables, trying to steady her nerves. She heard the front door close quietly, signaling Sophia's return. Laura turned, a gentle smile tugging at her lips as she watched her daughter slide out of her shoes and hesitantly step into the room. There was something distant in Sophia's gaze, a reluctance that hadn't been there before. "Hey, sweetheart, how was school?" Laura asked casually, working to keep her tone light. Sophia shrugged, barely lifting her eyes. "Fine," she mumbled. Laura felt her pulse quicken. "I spoke with Mrs. Morales today. She mentioned you've been a bit quieter than usual." Sophia's shoulders tensed, her lips pressing together as if she could hold the words inside. She fidgeted, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, avoiding her mother's gaze. "Sweetheart, you know you can tell me anything," Laura encouraged softly, kneeling down so she was eye-level with her daughter. "I want to help, whatever it is." A heavy silence hung in the air, interrupted only by the soft clink of Laura setting the knife down on the counter. Sophia took a shaky breath, her eyes finally meeting her mother's, filled with a vulnerability that almost shattered Laura's composure. "It's—" Sophia's voice was a whisper. "It's Dad. When you're not here. He's different." Laura's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression calm, urging Sophia with a reassuring nod. "Different? How, Sophia?" The girl hesitated, casting her eyes down again, her fingers now trembling as they continued to twist at her sweater. "He yells at me. Says I'm useless if I don't do things right. And sometimes he pushes me. Hurts me." Laura felt her chest tighten painfully. The words hit her like blunt blows, each one chiseling away at the calm she tried so hard to maintain. Barney, her husband, the man who'd once been her steady companion, was now a stranger in her mind, his face shifting in her memory into something harsh, even dangerous. She forced herself to breathe, to keep her voice steady. "Sophia, why didn't you tell me sooner?" A pained expression crossed Sophia's face. "He said no one would believe me and that I'd only make you angry if I said anything." The crack in Laura's heart grew deeper. She reached out, gathering Sophia into her arms, feeling the frailty of her small frame, the quiet tremor that ran through her as she pressed her face against her mother's shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart, I'll always believe you." Her voice was tender, but laced with an underlying steel, each word as much a promise as a comfort. "No matter what anyone says, I am here for you." They stayed like that, held together by unspoken understanding, Laura's resolve hardening as her mind spun through the implications. She wanted to confront Barney, to demand an explanation for the accusations piercing her heart like barbed wire. But the thought of Sophia's quiet fear made her pause. It was a delicate thread that tethered them all, and one wrong move could snap it irreparably. For now, Laura's priority was Sophia, keeping her safe, bringing her back to the light. And yet, a gnawing doubt lurked in the shadows of her thoughts, a question she didn't dare to voice aloud. How long had she been blind to the man she thought she knew? As she looked into her daughter's eyes, Laura felt her protective instincts surge, carrying with them the seed of a plan. She would find the truth, even if it meant unraveling everything she believed in, for Sophia's sake. "Come on, let's finish up dinner," she said, trying to infuse her voice with warmth and familiarity. "Then you and I can have some ice cream. Just the two of us. Okay?" Sophia gave a faint smile, nodding as she moved to stand beside her mother. In that small, hesitant gesture, Laura felt a fragile hope, a glimmer that for now was enough. And as the last rays of evening sun filtered through the kitchen window, she silently vowed to uncover the truth, whatever the cost. Barney appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing his usual calm expression. He didn't seem aware of the conversation Laura had just had with Sophia, or perhaps he did, and was just hiding it. The thought sent a chill down Laura's spine. "Good morning," he said, giving her a quick peck on the cheek. "Up early? Couldn't I sleep?" Laura tried to smile but couldn't ignore the new distance she felt, a space that hadn't existed between them before. She now looked at him differently, watching for any sign, any small clue that might confirm Sophia's story. "No, I didn't sleep well," Laura admitted, averting her gaze. Barney's brow furrowed, his concern plain. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying an unusual seriousness. "You look pale." Laura nodded slowly, still avoiding his eyes. "Yes, just a lot on my mind." He studied her for a moment longer, but let it go. He poured himself a coffee, settled in at the counter, and began preparing his breakfast while Laura stood silently, lost in her thoughts. For years, she'd trusted Barney without question. She'd had no reason to doubt his love for Sophia. But now, everything felt different, as if a shadow had crept between them. "And Sophia?" he asked, not looking up from his coffee. "She's been so quiet lately. I wondered if something's going on at school." The mention of her daughter's name sent a pang through Laura's stomach. The casual way Barney brought up Sophia only unsettled her more. Was he being genuine, or was he pretending? Everything he said now held a different meaning in her mind. "Yes, I've noticed too," Laura replied carefully. "Maybe it's something at school, or something else." Barney glanced at her, out of the corner of his eye, but said nothing, finishing his coffee and checking his phone as he ate. Laura watched him from a distance, keeping quiet. She wanted to ask him directly, to confront him then and there, but something held her back. If Sophia was right and Barney denied everything, he might just become even more cautious. Or worse, even more aggressive. No, she had to tread carefully. When Barney left the kitchen to get ready for work, Laura found herself alone once more, her mind swarming with doubts. What if she was wrong? What if confronting Barney only proved Sophia had misunderstood? But then there was the other possibility. What if Sophia was telling the truth, and Laura did nothing? How could she live with herself if her daughter continued to suffer? Laura walked into the living room, gazing at the familiar space around her. She remembered the last time she'd left Sophia at home alone with her father. Had something happened then? She replayed every interaction between Barney and Sophia in her mind. but nothing stood out. There'd been no yelling, no arguments. Everything had seemed normal when she was there. Yet that only made Sophia's confession more disturbing. With a sigh, Laura moved to the small desk in the corner of the room, opening a folder with important documents, including information on the security cameras they'd installed outside the house years ago. As she pulled out the folder, a knot formed in her stomach. She knew what she needed to do, but the thought of setting up cameras inside her own home unsettled her. She opened the folder and found the installation instructions. She knew the setup process well enough, but this time things would be different. These would be hidden cameras, small and discreet, placed solely to record what happened between Barney and Sophia when she wasn't around. It would be the only way to uncover the truth without disrupting the household routine. If Sophia was right, the footage would confirm it. And if not, Laura would have evidence that Barney wasn't the monster she feared he might be. She sat staring at the papers for a long time. How had it come to this? How could she even consider spying on her own husband? But the image of Sophia, with tears in her eyes, pleading for her to believe, kept her grounded. Resolved, she tucked the documents back into the folder and began forming a plan. She would need small, hidden cameras in strategic spots where Barney wouldn't notice them. She couldn't afford any mistakes. If there was anything to discover, she would find it. And if she was wrong, then she'd apologize to Barney and things would go on as usual. Laura felt the weight of what she was about to do, but she knew she couldn't just stand by. It was her duty as a mother to protect her child, and if that meant distrusting the man she shared her life with, so be it. As she reviewed the details of the cameras, she heard Barney moving towards the front door. "I'm off to work," he called, giving her a carefree smile from the doorway. "See you tonight?" Laura managed a weak smile, hiding the turmoil churning within her. "See you, Barney," she replied softly. When the door closed, Laura was left alone in the house, alone with her thoughts and the growing sense that she was about to uncover something that would change her life forever. The morning passed in a tense silence. She'd dropped Sophia off at school, hugging her tightly as they said goodbye, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Mum, will everything be okay?" Sophia asked softly before disappearing into the school building. Laura forced a smile and smoothed her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Don't worry about anything, all right?" Laura said, her voice steady as she could manage. Sophia nodded and walked inside, leaving Laura staring after her, replaying the same questions over and over in her mind. What if she's right? What if she's in danger? And I didn't realize it until now. Back at home, Laura wasted no time. She knew Barney wouldn't be back until late, so she had several hours to act. Opening her computer, she discreetly began researching indoor security cameras. She couldn't risk buying anything obvious, anything Barney could easily spot. She needed something discreet, something that could blend into the house unnoticed, something she could tuck away in strategic places where it would capture what really happened between him and Sophia when she wasn't there. After an hour of searching, Laura finally found exactly what she needed. Tiny cameras disguised as common household objects. One looked like a clock, another like a small lamp. She decided to purchase them and chose express delivery. She couldn't afford to waste time. If Sophia was telling the truth, every minute Barney spent alone with her daughter was a threat. As she waited for the delivery, Laura's anxiety grew. She paced from room to room, mentally mapping out where to place the cameras without Barney noticing. The hallway. It might capture something if he moved between rooms. Each corner of the house seemed to take on a new purpose, a new dimension. It was now a place to discover the truth. Finally, the doorbell rang. Laura sprang from her chair, heart pounding. She opened the door, hurried to the living room, and began unpacking the equipment. Each camera was even more discreet than she'd hoped, which offered her a small comfort. If everything went as planned, Barney would never know he was being watched. She placed the first camera in the living room, tucking it among books and knickknacks on the shelf. From there, it had a perfect view of the sofa and television, where Barney and Sophia often spent time together. Her hand shook slightly as she adjusted the camera's angle, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had never imagined herself doing something like this. How had she come to this point? How had she become someone who would spy on her own husband? For Sophia, she reminded herself softly, there was no other choice. The second camera was harder to place. Laura chose the hallway that connected the living room to the bedrooms, reasoning that if Barney tried to speak with Sophia privately or brought her to his room, the camera would capture any interaction. She adjusted the small lamp, disguising the camera, and stepped back to make sure it was undetectable. Satisfied, she moved on to the next task. She installed a third camera in Sophia's room, concealed within a small decoration on her desk. Laura knew that her daughter's room was the most crucial place to monitor, though it pained her to think that this safe space, her daughter's sanctuary, would now be witness to something far darker. When she finished setting up the cameras, Laura sank onto the couch, exhausted. Her body and mind were drained. She mentally rehearsed every possible scenario. What if the cameras captured exactly what Sophia had described? And what if they didn't? Both answers were equally terrifying. Laura connected the cameras to her phone and tested the connection. Now she could see every room, every key corner of the house in real time. All that was left was to wait. The next morning she would leave as usual, allowing Barney and Sophia to be alone in the house. And then she would review the footage. As she adjusted the final settings, the sound of keys in the front door jolted her. Barney had returned earlier than she'd expected. Quickly, she hid the empty package and turned off her phone's screen. The door opened and Barney entered, looking relaxed. "How was your day?" he asked, unaware of her nervousness. "Fine," Laura replied with a tense smile. "I was just doing a few things around the house." Barney nodded, placing his briefcase on the table. His face showed no suspicion, no hint that he sensed anything unusual. This calmed her slightly, but only just. "And Sophia?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of water. "She's at school. I'll pick her up later." Laura watched him in silence as he sat on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. The ease with which Barney moved around the house made everything seem normal, as though he was still the husband and father she thought she knew. But the doubt lingered, deep and unwavering. That night, Laura lay awake, her heart racing as she braced herself for what the next 24 hours might reveal. The cameras were already active, and in the quiet of the night, she prepared herself for the truth. The next morning, Laura forced a smile as she said goodbye to Barney. Sophia had already left for school, and everything appeared routine. She held her car keys in one hand, her phone in the other, connected now to the hidden cameras, which sat snugly in her back pocket. Barney, oblivious, gave her a quick peck on the cheek before heading to work. "See you tonight," he said, unaware of the storm brewing within her. "Yes, of course," Laura replied, her mind already focused on what would happen once the house was empty. She arrived at the office, but her mind was nowhere near her work. All morning, Laura found herself glancing at her phone more times than she could count, scrolling through the security footage at regular intervals, looking for something, anything. Deep down, part of her wanted to see Barney as the father she'd known all these years, the loving man she believed would never harm his daughter. Yet there was a darker part of her that dreaded confirming what Sophia had told her. Around noon, Laura slipped out of the office and settled into her car, clutching her phone, her heart racing as she queued up the recordings once more. She felt like a spy, tangled in a mission she'd never intended to take on. The screen displayed her empty living room, the hallway, Sophia's bedroom, each corner calm and silent. Suddenly, her phone vibrated as the motion sensor picked something up in the living room. Holding her breath, she watched Barney enter. He'd returned home during his lunch break, an unusual habit for him. A chill crept up her spine. Why is he here? Barney strolled into the living room, glancing at his phone before sinking into the couch. Laura's eyes stayed glued to the screen. Everything looked normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She whispered under her breath, "Come on, show me something." But Barney only sat there, doing nothing particularly alarming. After a few minutes, he rose and left the room, disappearing out of frame. Quickly, Laura switched to the hallway camera, watching as Barney walked toward the kitchen. The slight relief she'd begun to feel was swiftly replaced by an ache in her stomach. Why had he come home in the middle of the day? When it was finally time to pick up Sophia from school, Laura searched her daughter's face, hoping to detect any shift since that morning. "How was school today, honey?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with tension. Sophia shrugged, the same tired motion she'd been making lately. "Fine, Mom, just normal stuff." Then, almost before she realized it, Laura found herself asking, "Is everything okay at home with Dad?" Sophia's gaze snapped up, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Dad was kind of strange today," she said, almost whispering. "He was home when I got back, but he didn't talk to me much. He just sat there looking at his phone. Then he left before you got home." Laura's stomach tightened even further. Something wasn't right. That night, once they were back home, Laura left Sophia in her room, doing homework, and slipped into the living room. She went through the day's recordings over and over, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. Most of the footage was unremarkable until she got to the hallway clip. There, for just a fraction of a second, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Barney had stopped in front of Sophia's bedroom door, standing there as if lost in thought. He hadn't moved, hadn't touched the door, but his stillness, the uncharacteristic look in his eyes, rattled her deeply. It was such a small, almost imperceptible detail, yet enough to set off every alarm in her mind. What was he thinking? Why did he stop there? Was it mere coincidence, or something far darker? Closing the phone app, Laura leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes just for a moment. The day had been an emotional whirlwind, but she was now more certain than ever that something was wrong. She might not have seen anything overtly alarming, but her instincts as a mother urged her to stay vigilant. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. Night had fallen, and the house lay quiet. Barney was absorbed in the television in the living room, and Sophia had finished her homework and gone to bed. But Laura found no peace. Instead of sitting beside her husband and sharing in their usual nightly routine, she remained in the bedroom, phone in hand, combing through the recordings again. She knew she shouldn't be doing this with Barney just a room away, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Each swipe across the screen only fueled her anxiety. She hadn't caught anything blatantly disturbing, but the small signs kept piling up. The way Barney lingered by Sophia's door, his prolonged silences in the living room, his unexpected returns home. It all seemed so benign on the surface, yet Sophia's words echoed in her mind. "Dad is mean to me when you're not here." She replayed the hallway footage. There he was again, Barney standing motionless in front of Sophia's door, simply staring. He didn't move, didn't open it, just stood there, looking. But there was something unsettling in Barney's stance. It was as if he were weighing a decision, stopping himself right before doing something. The silence on the screen amplified the strangeness of it all. Laura slid her finger across the screen, skimming through hours of that day's recordings. Most of it was unremarkable. Barney moving from one room to another, apparently doing nothing out of the ordinary. But then something caught her eye. In one of the living room recordings, Barney's voice was raised, not shouting, but firm and almost intimidating. Laura turned up the volume on her phone, straining to catch each word. "Sophia, come here right now," Barney commanded, his voice authoritative. Sophia appeared at the edge of the screen, walking into the room with slow, careful steps, shoulders slouched, as though she already knew what was coming. Laura's stomach twisted in knots. It looked like a typical father-daughter scene. Yet there was something about the way Barney looked at Sophia that felt disturbingly off. "Why did you leave this lying around?" he asked, pointing at something out of frame. His tone wasn't harsh, but Laura could feel the tension in the room, almost as if she were standing there herself. Sophia murmured something inaudible, and Barney made a sharp gesture with his hand, directing her to pick up whatever it was she'd left out of place. Sophia obeyed immediately, her head down. Barney didn't say anything else but watched her with an expression Laura couldn't recognize. When Sophia finished, she quickly left the room. Barney stood still for a few seconds, then returned to the couch as if nothing had happened. Laura paused the recording, staring at the screen as her mind raced. It hadn't been physical abuse, not in any obvious way, but the way Barney had treated Sophia, the coldness in his voice, the way her daughter seemed to shrink in his presence, all pointed to something deeply wrong. "Why didn't I see this sooner?" Laura asked herself quietly. Perhaps she'd been so busy, so preoccupied with other things that she hadn't noticed how the relationship between Barney and Sophia had changed. Maybe he'd always been strict, but now every interaction seemed charged with something deeper, something Laura hadn't wanted to see. Sophia had been honest with her. That much was now clear. And while the footage didn't definitively prove physical mistreatment, it confirmed that something was terribly off in Barney and Sophia's dynamic. The coldness, the distance, the way Sophia avoided her father when he spoke to her. Laura could no longer ignore the signs. She decided to review more footage, searching for patterns in Barney's behavior. Every time Sophia appeared on screen, she looked withdrawn, as if she wished she could disappear. Laura recalled how Sophia used to be when she was younger, how she would run to greet her father when he came home from work, always eager to see him. But that child was gone. In her place was a version of Sophia Laura hardly recognized, a frightened, anxious girl who did everything she could to avoid displeasing her father. A wave of guilt washed over Laura. How did I miss this? She wondered. Sophia had been dealing with this, alone, for who knew how long, and Laura hadn't been there to protect her. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly turned off the phone screen just as Barney entered the room. "What are you doing up so late?" Barney asked, with a tired smile. "I thought you'd be watching TV with me." Laura tried to calm herself, controlling her breathing as she fought to keep her anxiety in check. "Just going over some work things," she replied quickly, forcing a smile. Barney looked at her for a moment longer than she would have liked, but then he shrugged. "Well, don't stay up too late. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Laura nodded, watching as Barney turned and walked out of the room. Once Laura was certain Barney couldn't see her, she switched her phone back on and watched the recordings once more. What she'd seen still wasn't enough to confront Barney directly, but her certainty grew stronger with every view. Something was deeply wrong in her home. That night, Laura barely slept, her mind revisiting every detail of what she had seen and heard. The pieces were slowly fitting together, and although the picture was still unclear, she knew a decision loomed on the horizon. The days passed with a subtle yet unsettling tension. Laura sensed the truth would soon reveal itself, but before facing it head-on, she wanted to be sure of what she would discover. The footage held flickers of insight, hints that nudged her closer to understanding, yet they felt incomplete, insufficient to confront Barney outright. She wanted answers without tipping her hand, so she resolved to observe him closely, seeking any trace in his behavior when she was around. That morning, Laura rose early, preparing breakfast with a fresh resolve. She watched Barney more intently than usual, noting the way he stood by the coffee maker, waiting for his coffee as he did every morning. But this time, Laura read every movement with a new awareness. His posture, his expression, everything seemed the same, yet doubt lingered in her mind. "Is everything okay?" Barney asked, his brow furrowing as he noticed her watchful gaze. Laura blinked, realizing she'd been staring. "Oh, yes. Just thinking about a few things," she replied, forcing herself to sound casual. Barney nodded and returned his focus to his coffee, but Laura couldn't shake the impression that he, too, had changed subtly since her conversation with Sophia. It was almost imperceptible, but she sensed a caution in him, as if he was aware that something was off but wouldn't name it. Moments later, Sophia entered the kitchen, her eyes shifting carefully as she kept her distance from her father. Laura noticed how her daughter avoided his gaze entirely, her behavior quiet and obedient, but marked by a clear anxiety not to draw attention to herself. Barney, on the other hand, barely acknowledged her. The silence between them was thick and uneasy, each passing moment deepening Laura's growing suspicions. After dropping Sophia at school, Laura knew she couldn't keep waiting. She needed answers, and although she wasn't yet ready for a direct confrontation, she decided to test the waters. That evening, when Barney returned home, Laura was waiting in the living room. She had prepared a simple dinner as usual, but this time she approached the conversation with a careful subtlety, watching for any reaction. "Barney, I've noticed Sophia has seemed a bit withdrawn lately," Laura said as she set their plates. "Have you noticed anything different about her?" Barney looked up from his plate, frowning slightly. "Withdrawn? I don't know. Maybe it's just her age, right?" He shrugged. "Kids that age start acting out a bit." Laura's gaze lingered on him, looking for even a flicker of discomfort. But Barney's expression remained neutral, almost indifferent. "I'm not sure it's just that," Laura pressed gently, keeping her tone casual. "Sometimes she seems scared. How do things go with her when I'm not around?" Barney sighed, an edge of irritation creeping into his voice. "Laura, I don't know what you're talking about. Things are fine with her, like always. Maybe it's something at school, but she's got no issues with me." Laura nodded slowly, but his response left her unsatisfied. There was a chill in Barney's tone, a seeming lack of concern for Sophia's well-being, and it only heightened her alertness. She decided to push just a bit further. "It's just, I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right," she added, choosing her words carefully. "She avoids me whenever I try to discuss certain things. Haven't you noticed anything strange?" Barney looked at her, his expression darkening, as if beginning to feel accused. "You're seeing things that aren't there. Sophia's fine, and I haven't done anything to her. Why are you so suddenly concerned?" "Is everything all right?" asked Barney, crossing his arms. The tone of the conversation shifted subtly. Laura noticed the slight change in his posture, the way his defensiveness was becoming more pronounced. She knew that if she kept pushing, it might escalate into a confrontation she wasn't ready for, so she decided to ease off a bit. "I'm not saying you've done anything wrong," Laura said quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. "I just wanted to know if you've noticed the same thing." Barney relaxed slightly, but the discomfort in the air didn't fully dissipate. "Look, if you're worried, why don't you talk to her yourself?" Barney replied. "But I can assure you it has nothing to do with me." Laura nodded again, but the doubts in her mind only grew stronger. She knew she couldn't trust his words, not after what she'd seen on the recordings. Although Barney denied everything, his distant and defensive attitude only intensified her suspicion that something was wrong. That night, as Barney slept beside her, Laura quietly reviewed the day's recordings. She waited until he was in a deep sleep before turning on her phone. The images from the hallway and living room didn't show anything unusual, but each of Barney's movements now unsettled her more deeply. Just watching him walk through the house, as if there were no issues at all, made Laura's anxiety grow. She knew she couldn't keep going like this. She needed to confront him somehow, but she also knew she needed more conclusive evidence. The cold, tense relationship between Barney and Sophia was becoming more apparent each day, but Laura hadn't yet seen anything that fully confirmed what her daughter had told her. She decided to wait a little longer, to keep observing and monitoring, though the fear of wasting precious time weighed heavily on her chest. The puzzle pieces were still incomplete, but Laura knew that sooner or later the truth would come to light. It was one of those nights where Laura could hardly focus on the present. The day had been long and exhausting, not because of work or chores, but because of the constant feeling that something terrible was about to be revealed. Since she had begun spying on Barney, her daily life had become a mixture of vigilance and fear. She watched his every move with an intensity that drained her energy, waiting for the moment when the truth, whatever it was, would finally present itself. That night, after Sophia went to bed and Barney retired to the bedroom, Laura returned to her routine of reviewing the recordings. Her heart pounded as she did, a mix of anxiety and dread filling her mind. She knew she was close to finding something. She could feel it, even if she couldn't predict what it would reveal. Sitting in the darkened living room, with only the light of her phone illuminating her face, she began to skim through the day's footage. Nothing out of the ordinary appeared that morning, but by the afternoon, something shifted. The hallway camera had captured movement that made Laura's heart race. There was Barney, pacing back and forth in front of Sophia's bedroom door. But this time, he didn't just pause at the door like he had in previous recordings. This time, he went inside her room. Laura's stomach twisted instantly. She watched as Sophia's bedroom door closed slowly behind him. She hurriedly switched to the camera inside Sophia's room, holding her breath. What she saw next left her breathless. Sophia was sitting on her bed, her face frozen in absolute fear. Barney moved toward her slowly, his gaze cold and severe. Though Laura couldn't hear the words, their body language was unmistakable. Barney was speaking with a harshness Laura had never seen before, and Sophia was cornered, shrinking back, staring at her father as if there was no escape. Barney raised his hand in a gesture of warning. He didn't strike her, but the intent was painfully clear. Her daughter was visibly trembling. The words were inaudible, but the terror on Sophia's face was all Laura needed to understand that everything her daughter had told her was true. At that moment, the man on the screen wasn't the husband she thought she knew. Laura felt her world collapse around her. She had sensed something was wrong from the beginning, but seeing it with her own eyes was devastating. The man she had loved, the father of her child, was intimidating Sophia, manipulating her with a cruelty Laura could never have imagined. Tears began to stream down her face. She turned off the sound on the recordings to avoid Barney hearing, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. She watched Sophia try to speak, but each time, Barney responded more harshly. The scene was brief, but sufficient. Laura didn't need to see more. She had the proof she needed, and her heart broke into pieces. She knew that from that moment on, she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. There were no more doubts. No more, "What if I'm wrong?" The evidence was there, undeniable. Now she faced an even harder decision. What to do? Moments later, Barney returned to the living room, interrupting her thoughts. Laura quickly turned off her phone screen and stood up from the sofa, trying to hide her agitation. He didn't seem to suspect anything, at least not yet. "Everything all right?" Barney asked, his tone casual, as if nothing had changed. Laura nodded, forcing herself to keep a neutral expression. "Yes, everything's fine, just thinking about some things from work," she said, avoiding his eyes. Barney watched her for a second longer, then shrugged and headed to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. She looked after him as he disappeared down the hallway, her mind spinning with the revelation she'd just witnessed. She couldn't just stand there pretending everything was normal. She had to protect Sophia. But how could she confront Barney without him suspecting she'd been watching him? The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. The only certainty she had was that there was no turning back now. That night, Laura didn't sleep. In the darkness, as she listened to Barney's steady breathing beside her, she replayed what she'd seen over and over in her mind. She thought of Sophia, her little girl who had endured this alone, without support, without protection. Laura felt guilt, anger, and fear, all at once. Her daughter had tried to tell her the truth, and though she had done the right thing by investigating, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed as a mother. The next morning, Laura knew she couldn't keep acting like nothing had happened. Confronting Barney was inevitable, but she needed time to plan how to do it. She didn't want him to react violently, not with Sophia in the house. She knew that if she didn't handle it carefully, things could escalate quickly. She decided her first step should be to talk to someone, maybe a close friend, someone she trusted who could give her guidance on how to proceed. But above all, she knew she had to act quickly. Barney couldn't keep hurting Sophia, and Laura wasn't going to let it continue for even one more day. With her phone still in hand, she watched the footage again. This time, she didn't let the tears take over. There was no time for crying, not when she needed to be strong for her daughter. She played the scene again, as if to make sure what she'd seen was real. With each passing second, her resolve grew stronger. She would confront Barney, but this time, she wouldn't be the submissive wife. This time, she would be a mother protecting her child, no matter the cost. As dawn broke with an odd sense of calm, the first rays of sun filtered through the bedroom window. But Laura hadn't slept a wink. She knew what she had to do, but uncertainty kept her on edge. Beside her, Barney slept peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to change forever. Laura knew she couldn't keep putting off the confrontation, but she also didn't want to rush it. She knew that one wrong move could make things much worse. What if she confronted him, and he denied everything? What if his reaction was violent? Sophia's safety was all that mattered now, and Laura needed to be sure her daughter was safe when the time came to act. Laura made a decision. She needed the advice of someone she trusted, someone who could help her think clearly. She couldn't bear this burden alone. She unlocked her phone, and after a few seconds of hesitation, she decided to call her friend, Clara, one of the few people she trusted completely. "Clara, can you talk?" Laura's voice was low and trembling. "Of course, Laura. Are you all right? You sound terrible." Laura took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. "I'm not all right. I need to see you." "It's urgent," she replied, her throat tight with a lump she couldn't swallow. "Of course, come over. What's going on?" "I'll explain when I get there," Laura said, ending the call before her voice could betray her. She left the house, making sure Barney didn't notice her agitation. Sophia was already at school and Barney was about to leave for work, so the timing was perfect for a visit to Clara without arousing suspicion. As she drove, Laura felt her body trembling slightly, not just with nerves, but with contained fury. What she had discovered the night before was too much to process alone. When she arrived at Clara's house, her friend was already waiting at the door. Clara, always perceptive, immediately sensed that something was deeply wrong. Without a word, she embraced Laura tightly, guiding her inside. Laura let herself be held, feeling like she could finally release some of the weight she'd been carrying. "Tell me everything. What's going on?" Clara asked, leading her to the living room. Laura sat on the sofa, wringing her hands nervously. She didn't know where to begin, but finally the words broke through. "Sophia told me that Barney treats her badly when I'm not home," she said, her voice faltering. "At first, I didn't believe her, or maybe I didn't want to. But I installed cameras, and last night I saw it." Clara's eyes widened with shock as she took in Laura's confession. "What did you see, Laura?" she asked, her voice hushed but urgent. Laura's gaze fell. "I saw him intimidate her, speaking to her with a coldness I'd never seen before. He didn't touch her, but it didn't matter. The fear in her eyes said it all." Clara sat silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of what Laura had revealed. "Oh, Laura," she finally murmured, her voice tight. "What are you going to do?" Laura swallowed hard. "I don't know. I don't know how to confront this without making things worse. I can't risk Sophia being in danger, but I can't keep ignoring what's happening either. He's her father, Clara, and at that moment, I didn't even recognize him." Clara leaned forward, taking Laura's hands in hers. "The first thing you have to do is protect Sophia. She can't stay close to him if he's hurting her, no matter what. You have to get her out of the house or make sure he leaves." "But how?" Laura's voice cracked under the weight of the question. "If I confront him, he might deny everything. Or worse, if he finds out I've been watching, I don't know how he'll react." Clara nodded, thinking through the possibilities. "I understand. But you know you can't let this go on. If Barney is harming Sophia, you have to act, and now. I'll support you in whatever you decide, but maybe it's best to speak with an attorney, or even the police." The word police made Laura's heart skip a beat. She'd never considered that possibility before, but now it felt unavoidable. If Barney denied everything, how could she protect Sophia without involving the authorities? The idea of calling the police frightened her, but she knew it was an option she had to face. "You're right," Laura said slowly, nodding. "I need to handle this carefully, legally, so he can't say I'm acting on impulse. I have the recordings as proof, but I want to be ready for anything." Clara squeezed her hand, offering her full support. "Laura, I'll be here for whatever you need. Sophia comes first. You're not alone in this." Laura felt a small part of the weight on her shoulders lift. Talking with Clara had cleared her mind, and though she knew this would take time, she'd made her decision. She would protect her daughter at any cost. When she returned home later that day, Barney was still at work. Laura sat at the kitchen table, her eyes on the clock as she weighed her next steps. She knew she couldn't keep putting off the confrontation, but she also knew she had to do it strategically. She decided she would speak with a lawyer the following day, but for now, she'd have to keep up appearances and make sure Sophia was never alone with Barney. The silence of the house wrapped around her as she thought about what lay ahead. Barney would be home any moment, and she would have to pretend everything was fine for just one more day. But this time, Laura didn't feel powerless. She knew she was taking control of the situation, and that soon enough, she would put an end to all of it. That night, when Barney came home and the family's routine went on as usual, Laura felt stronger than ever. She had made the hardest decision of her life, and she knew it was the right one. Though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. Sophia would be safe, no matter what. Laura had spent the night before wide awake, going over her plan again and again. The course was set. She would confront Barney with the evidence and force him to face what he'd done. She wasn't sure how he would react, but she'd taken precautions. She'd left Sophia with Clara for the afternoon, ensuring her safety before she faced her husband. She couldn't risk Sophia being there for what might be an intense confrontation. That afternoon, when Barney came home, he found Laura waiting for him in the living room. The air in the house was dense, charged with an almost static tension. Laura was seated on the sofa, her phone in hand, waiting for him to enter. Barney noticed at once that something was off. He frowned as he shrugged off his coat, his eyes scanning the room, trying to pinpoint what didn't fit. "Is everything okay?" he asked, a hint of unease in his voice. Laura looked him directly in the eyes for the first time in days. There was no room left for doubt or fear. The moment had arrived. "Barney, sit down." Laura's tone was firm and steady, though her heart thundered inside her chest. Barney gave her a wary look, reluctant, but finally obeyed, sinking into the chair across from her. "What's this about?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Laura took a deep breath, trying to control the surge of emotions building within her. She needed to stay composed. "Sophia's been telling me things I didn't want to believe at first, but I can't ignore them anymore." Barney paused, his expression shifting from annoyance to something more guarded. A hint of confusion crossed his face, his posture stiffening as if preparing for a confrontation he hadn't seen coming. "What are you talking about?" he asked, doing his best to sound incredulous. Laura pulled her phone from her pocket, lifting it for him to see. "I've been recording what happens here when I'm not around. I've seen how you treat our daughter, Barney. I've seen everything." Barney's face was drained of color, his hands clenched subtly on his knees, though he struggled to keep his composure. Laura watched as the realization settled over him. He was cornered, and there was no way to escape the truth now. "Recording?" Barney echoed, his voice barely a whisper. "You've been spying on me?" "I had no other choice," Laura replied, her eyes blazing with restrained anger. "Sophia told me how you talk to her, how you treat her when I'm not home. At first, I didn't want to believe her. I thought maybe she was exaggerating. But I recorded it, Barney. I saw how you intimidate her, how you make her feel small, scared. You can't deny it. I have it all here." Abruptly, Barney pushed himself up from the chair, pacing back and forth across the room. The irritation in his voice gave way to something darker, a volatile mix of fear and anger. You don't know what you're talking about, Laura. You're taking all of this out of context, he said, his voice rising. Sophia's exaggerating. She's always been a difficult child, and I was just trying to discipline her. Discipline? Laura's voice shook with disbelief. This isn't discipline, Barney. You're scaring her, making her feel worthless. Sophia's terrified of you. She's afraid of her own father. That's not discipline, it's abuse. Barney froze, his gaze sharpening as he turned to face her. His eyes held a coldness Laura hadn't seen before, a darkness that made her stomach twist. Abuse, he repeated, laughing bitterly. Is that what you think? That I'm abusing my own daughter just because I'm not as soft as you? Do you really think I'm some kind of monster? Laura held his gaze, unflinching. I saw it in the recordings, Barney. The way you act around her isn't normal. It's not how a father treats his daughter. You terrify her, and I won't let it continue. I won't let you hurt her anymore. A tense silence filled the room. Barney's breathing grew rapid, his demeanor shifting with every word Laura spoke. He was visibly shaken, yet he refused to admit any guilt. This is insane, he finally muttered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm not doing anything wrong, Laura. I'm just trying to make sure our daughter doesn't grow up spoiled. Maybe you don't understand because you treat her like she's made of glass. But I'm her father. I have a right to discipline her. Laura rose from the couch, moving closer, a strength in her voice she hadn't felt before. You have the right to be her father, Barney, but not to harm her. Sophia is petrified, and you're the reason. I won't stand by while you continue to hurt her. I've spoken to an attorney, Barney. If you don't leave this house, I'll take legal steps to ensure you do. Barney stared at her, disbelief mingling with rage. He knew she wasn't bluffing. Her tone, the conviction in her gaze, left no room for him to doubt her resolve. An attorney, he sneered. You're really going to do this? Tear apart our family over some twisted exaggeration? Laura held his gaze, unwavering. Our family is already torn apart, Barney. You broke it the moment you started treating Sophia the way you do. If you don't leave today, everyone will know. I don't care what you say. I don't care how you justify it. I've seen it all, and Sophia deserves a life without fear. This is your last chance, Barney. Either you leave or I handle this legally. Barney fell silent, the weight of defeat evident as his shoulders slumped slightly. It was as if at last he grasped the gravity of what lay before him. He turned, left the room without a word, and walked out. The house, now empty of his presence, settled into a deep, unfamiliar silence. He was gone, driven away the night before after Laura had confronted him with the irrefutable evidence she'd gathered. There had been no shouting, no more hollow excuses, only the bitter acceptance that his time in that house had ended. Laura couldn't quite place her feelings watching him go, her emotions tangled into a complex knot of relief, sadness, and a hollow emptiness. Sophia had spent the night with Clara, blissfully unaware of the confrontation that had played out between her parents. Laura had done all she could to shield Sophia from the chaos consuming their home, hoping to offer her even a moment of peace. Now, as she prepared to bring Sophia home, Laura found herself wondering about what lay ahead. She knew the days to come would be far from easy, but one thing was clear. Sophia would no longer have to live in fear. When Laura arrived at Clara's house, Sophia was waiting by the door, her small backpack slung over one shoulder, a timid smile brightening her face. Seeing her daughter, Laura was overwhelmed with gratitude. She had made the right choice. "Hey, sweetheart," Laura said, kneeling down to meet Sophia's eyes. Sophia ran into her arms, clinging tightly. "Is Dad at home?" she asked quietly, uncertainty thick in her voice. Laura took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding. No, Sophia. Dad's gone. He won't be living with us anymore. Sophia's eyes lingered on her mother's, processing the meaning of those words. There was no surprise, only a blend of emotions: relief, sadness, and finally, a calm Laura hadn't seen in her daughter for what felt like a very long time. "He won't hurt me anymore?" Sophia asked, her voice a whisper. Laura pulled her close, holding her tightly as if to absorb all the pain they had carried alone. "No, sweetheart, not anymore. Never again," Laura promised, tears stinging her eyes. That day, once back home, everything felt oddly normal. Laura and Sophia spent the afternoon watching movies, laughing, and sharing moments that had been painfully scarce in recent months. Though the house felt emptier without Barney's presence, Laura knew they had taken the first step toward a better future. In the days that followed, Laura began laying down the groundwork for their new lives. She met with a lawyer who guided her through the legal process of separation and securing full custody of Sophia. Though Barney had never inflicted physical harm, the emotional abuse he had subjected Sophia to was more than enough to justify the decision. Sophia, for her part, seemed to begin healing. She no longer shrank back at the mention of her father, nor did she display nervousness when Laura left her alone at home for short periods. It was as if the fear that had held her captive for so long was finally beginning to fade. One afternoon, while they were at the park, Sophia stopped swinging, looking up at Laura with a serious expression. "Mum, do you think Dad will ever change?" she asked, her question filled with the innocence of her age. Laura paused, considering her answer. She knew the bond between Barney and Sophia would be hard, maybe impossible to mend. But she couldn't lie or offer her daughter false hope. "I don't know, honey," she replied honestly. "Sometimes people have to learn things the hard way. What matters now is that you're safe, and he can't hurt you anymore. Maybe one day he'll change, but that's not something we need to think about now." Sophia nodded, appearing comforted by the answer. She climbed back onto the swing, swaying gently, her expression more at ease than Laura had seen in a long time. As the days turned into weeks, Laura noticed other changes in her daughter. Sophia laughed more, spoke with greater confidence, and began rediscovering small hobbies she had abandoned. The bond between mother and daughter flourished once again, this time free from the shadow of fear that had haunted them. Laura, too, found herself rebuilding her life, aware that the path ahead would be long. But the insecurity and fear that had once held her back were gone. She had faced the truth and protected her daughter, a triumph that filled her with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. One day, while Laura was making lunch, Sophia approached her from behind and wrapped her arms around her. It was an unexpected gesture, but filled with meaning. "Thank you, Mom," Sophia said, squeezing her tightly. "Thank you for everything." Laura paused, feeling tears well in her eyes. She turned, embracing her daughter with all the love she held in her heart. "There's no need to thank me, sweetheart. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." They had been through so much, yet here they were. There was no perfect ending, no magical solution, but they had survived. Sophia was safe, and together they would start anew, stronger than ever. And that's it, everyone. Thank you for sticking around until the end of this powerful story. It's a journey of resilience, healing, and above all, the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. Life doesn't always give us perfect endings or easy answers, but Laura's courage to protect Sophia at all costs reminds us of the strength that love can bring, even in the darkest of times. If you found this story moving or relatable, please consider hitting the like button, leaving a comment with your thoughts, or sharing this video. Your support helps us bring stories like these to life and reach others who might find a little light in them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you won't miss any future content. Thanks again, and remember, you're not alone on your journey. Stay strong, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.